Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a genuinely fascinating investigation into human history and genetics. We are going to be breaking down a specific presentation that uses modern genetic tracing to argue a pretty bold premise, that the entire human race actually traces directly back to the biblical Noah.
So, here is the big question we're looking at today. Is it actually possible that the genetic code locked inside our own bodies holds a literal mirror to ancient texts? The source material we're exploring makes the claim that we can, in fact, map our modern DNA all the way back to a single historical family.
Okay, let's start with Section 1, the biblical baseline.
The whole foundation of this presentation is built on Genesis chapter 9. It starts with the assertion that after a catastrophic global flood, the earth was completely repopulated by just 8 individuals: Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. But as you might be thinking, this immediately introduces a huge biological puzzle, right? How in the world could just a few individuals produce the massive diversity of skin tones, eye colors, and physical features we see all across the globe today?
Well, according to the source, the secret is melanin. Biologically speaking, our skin shade is simply determined by the amount of melanin we inherit from our parents. If you think about it like a formula, where lots of melanin is represented by capital letters and less melanin is represented by lowercase letters, you can easily see how a parent with dark skin and a parent with light skin can have a child with a perfectly intermediate skin tone. Now, applying this basic biology to Noah's family creates a really fascinating scenario. If Noah and his family possessed intermediate skin tones, meaning they carried a highly diverse genetic mix of upper and lowercase melanin genes, basic high school biology actually dictates they could produce an enormous variety of features. Just picture a simple Punnett square. A single couple with this specific genetic mix could theoretically produce literally every shade of human skin in just one single generation.
Which brings us to Section 2, the ancestor math problem. If we take a step back and look at human history through the lens of strict mathematics, we hit a massive contradiction. The logic is something we're all familiar with. You have 2 parents, they each have 2 parents, meaning you have 4 grandparents, then 8 great-grandparents, and so on. Assuming an average generation is roughly 25 years, the number of our individual ancestors doubles with every single step we take back in time.
But watch what happens when you run this math all the way out. If you go back just 1,000 years, which is about 41 generations, every human alive today should theoretically have 2 trillion ancestors alive at that exact moment in history. 2 trillion.
And here is the massive catch. Historical data shows that in the year 1000 AD, the actual global population was only about 350 million people. Obviously, 2 trillion ancestors simply could not have existed on a planet holding less than 500 million people.
To solve this absolute mathematical impossibility, the presentation points out that our family tree branches must overlap. We can't just have endless individual branches stretching back forever. They have to loop back and cross over each other. It means every person on Earth is actually related as distant cousins, forcing our individual lineages back to a shared original ancestor.
Let's move on to Section 3, tracking the missing nations.
Now, if we are all deeply connected back to a single family group, tracing history back to a specific figure like Noah hits a pretty big geographic roadblock. The source notes that while biblical texts heavily detail the lineages of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, they are almost entirely silent on the origins of massive populations in places like Northern Europe, China, the Americas, and Australia.
So how do we find them? That takes us to Section 4, the genetic clock.
To fill in these massive historical gaps, researchers turn to a modern forensic tool, the Y chromosome. You see, standard ancestry tests dilutes your DNA by half every generation, so you can't use them to look back very far. But the Y chromosome? That is passed completely intact down the male line from father to son. The presentation argues this perfectly mirrors the male-focused genealogies you find in ancient texts like Genesis 10. It acts as a kind of biological decoder ring.
And this Y chromosome literally ticks like a clock. By tracking genetic mistakes or mutations that naturally occur between fathers and sons, scientists can reliably count backward. The source states there's an average of 3 mutations per generation. By counting these, researchers can date the different branches of the human family tree and pinpoint exactly when certain groups split off from one another.
So let's tie this all together in Section 5, mapping DNA to Noah.
What exactly happens when this global DNA tree is mapped over ancient history? Well, according to the presentation, if you track a DNA branch known as R1b, which makes up the vast majority of Western European men today, their earliest ancestors actually originated over in Central Asia, roughly 1,000 years ago, and then migrated into Europe during the Middle Ages.
Similarly, tracking African and Arabian branches really challenges static concepts of race. The explainer shows how diverse groups, from lighter-skinned Arab populations all the way to dark-skinned sub-Saharan populations, can be genetically connected right back to shared ancestral branches located in ancient Egypt and Sudan.
And here is the grand conclusion of the presentation. It maps these global genetic lineages directly to Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The argument here is that the geographic distribution of modern DNA perfectly aligns with the specific names listed in Genesis. Lineages matching Shem and Ham are historically identifiable in the Middle East and Africa, while Japheth's descendants align perfectly with those unrecorded branches that migrated way out into Europe and Asia.
The source wraps up with a very emphatic claim. They argue that the base of the global DNA tree contains exactly 3 ancient lineages, which they say perfectly confirms the Genesis account. To them, the overlapping branches, the Y chromosome mutations, and the global geographic migrations all act as a flawless biological mirror to the biblical text.
Regardless of where you personally stand on the origins of humanity, this explainer leaves us pondering the incredible, inescapable mathematical reality of how deeply interconnected the human family truly is. We are all mathematical cousins, sharing overlapping branches on this vast, global family tree. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just how much of our ancient, shared history is actively ticking away inside our own DNA right now.